This particular session will be focusing on the latter, healthy humans, and how we might use linked open data in order to support our rural communities in accessing the data they need in order to improve the access to services where there's the need. And with me today, I have Courtney, who will introduce herself, Courtney O'Brien, and Sarah Owens. And Mike Carter from Scribble Maps will be doing the hands-on session after we have our opening roundtable dialogue on the 211 Unmet Human Services data set and how we might use that to support rural communities. So let me then introduce our speakers, or have them introduce it. But before I do that, here's the quick agenda. What we want to do is look at how, as partners, we can co-create resiliency in rural communities and neighborhoods, and how we use census data along with other kinds of geospatial data in order to do that. Let's start with introductions. And Courtney, tell us, who are you and what do you do? And what are you looking for from the Go Open Data Hackathon?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan. So hi, everyone. Good morning and happy to be here. So yes, my name is Courtney O'Neill and I am a registered dietitian as well as the project coordinator for the Simcoe County Food Council. And to give you a little bit of background on that, the Simcoe County Food Council is a community-based organization funded through a grant from the County of Simcoe, and we are working to reduce household food insecurity and enhance community food security. And the work that we do is driven by a framework that has 7 goals that range from poverty reduction to community food literacy, food skills, local food, supporting temporary food and emergency food relief. So quite a broad range of goals that collectively we work towards. And we have been, in business, if you will, for the last 2 years, just after the pandemic hit. So we've had a lot of great experiences working with our local food banks, food skills programs, community organizations. And what's brought us here today is this constant desire to have connection between all these assets, and how do we know what exists in our community? How can people, whether it's individuals in the community or organizations, access this information? And the conversations led us to Jonathan and Sarah, and then being here today. So my hope being here today is really seeing how we can use data and technology to put food assets into accessible forms so people can know what exists in their community.
That's great. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks for pointing out the need, because I think one of the key things we want to get out of this workshop is how the hackathon challenge that starts Saturday can address that need, specifically for rural communities. Now, Sarah, introduce yourself. What do you do? And how do you support the counties in using the unmet service needs to improve access to services in rural communities?
Hi, I'm Sarah Owens and I work for Community Connection, and we are one of 6 regional service providers for 211 in Ontario. If you haven't heard of 211, 211 is a 3-digit dialing code available everywhere in Canada and the United States. And we help to support individuals from our community get access to services that they need. So people can call, email, text, or chat with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We listen to people's problems and we connect them with community resources. So when Courtney says, what programs exist, that is sort of our bailiwick. We have a provincial database of community health, social service data that we use to support individuals. As part of this work, we record all of the interaction data to get an understanding of what the needs are at a community level. We also record unmet needs And all of that data is accumulated into our BI system, and we do openly share it. So with our conference here today, we'd love to introduce you to the kind of data that we are collecting and get it out there for people to find new and interesting ways on how to analyze it and help leverage it to support community needs.
Thanks very much. And yes, we'll come back to that BI dashboard and get you to define what BI is and how that dashboard supports people like myself in Cobourg and Courtney in the Simcoe County region. So let's start with a use case like food security in Simcoe County and map backwards to collect the data to analyze unmet service needs at the neighborhood level. So Sarah, one of the experiences you and I talked about was during the first phase of the pandemic. And the topic I'm going to talk about is a project that the Fleming postgrad students did. And it was an amazing project where they were looking at using point cloud to automate the reconfiguration of the food supply chain. This was made, the need came out of the necessity of reconfiguring the food chain when 12 of the 13 food banks in Northumberland County closed down. And the students used the FME server in order to take a spreadsheet created by the community partners in Cobourg and Northumberland County. And we maintain that record or that spreadsheet. And I'll show you more about that a little later after we do the hands-on with Scribble. But Sarah, coming back to that experience that I mentioned, during the food crisis, the initial phase, 211 was used by the county to organize the relief efforts. And one of the challenges was with a lot of the professionals that were not working, they contributed to the response, and it was great what they did. However, there was very little time to organize and coordinate those efforts at the county level. And so without naming names, let's talk about that experience that you had with an unmet need that came through 211 and how we might be able to improve the response using the technology I'm going to talk about later on. Sarah?
Yeah, so I think that specific example was when COVID happened, as Jonathan said, food banks had to change their operation models quickly, not have people come to them, but instead find ways to go out to people, presenting a unique challenge for their volunteers. In addition to that, I think people might not be aware of when schools close down, a lot of essential food programs get closed down too. There's an extra meal that a lot of vulnerable families have to provide. And that was the call that we got. A mother in a rural area of Northumberland County who very much utilized those community food programs that were offered in school to help supplement food for her children. And when that disappeared and she had her kids at home all day, she was really struggling. And she'd heard on the radio about a food program being offered locally, I won't say by whom. So we did a little digging for that, and we didn't have it in our database because it was just a few advertisements on the radio. And what we found out is that while they were doing a wonderful program, it wasn't available to people in the rural areas of their community. So people come together and think they're doing a really wonderful food service, and they were. It was necessary, it filled a gap, but it still excluded people. So these are the kinds of barriers that we want to be aware of when doing community planning. And it's also, just to plug that, some of the data that we collect. What are the barriers to food access by area? And how do we implement food solutions, or fill in the blank, whatever the need may be for people that considers all of those barriers and makes efforts to overcome them.
That's great. And Courtney, do you have any experiences from the first phases of the pandemic where that need that Sarah just addressed came up?
Yeah, a few different examples come up. I think one was just being aware of the temporary food relief programs or emergency food relief programs that existed in all the different communities. So that's where 211 data was extremely helpful. And then with that, there were all these pop-up programs coming on, or, you know, little initiatives that people wanted to support. And there was no, it was word of mouth, which is like, oh, really, how do you capture that in the rural setting? Because that is how information is usually shared. And so like for the Food Council, we have multiple meetings every month with different working groups. And that's how I get a lot of this information, is because, oh, I heard from so-and-so. So regular communication to try to capture this data was really, really important. I think building on what Sarah was saying, one of the food banks in Simcoe County started working with the local student nutrition program. And I know that's happened in a few other counties as well. And so how do you make people aware of that? And how do other organizations hear about it so they can maybe replicate it as like a best practice? So those are a few things in terms of temporary food relief. And then the other thing would be local food, and how a lot of local producers, smaller scale, you know, had more farm stands or catered to people looking to support local food organizations, and communicating that information to them as well, and knowing what was popping up. And so social media was another way of, if you've learned that information, how do you make sure it's in a space that everyone can access it?
That's great. And I'll give one example from Northumberland County. During the first wave of the pandemic, I walked down to the Salvation Army and stood out the back where people were showing up to get access to food and other resources that they needed. And I talked to one of the people there, and he had walked for an hour to get to the Salvation Hub, whereas normally they would be able to know where their clients are and be able to use their truck to get the resources out. But what happened with the federal response, there were dollars that came down. And the public health unit, for example, got $10,000 in Port Hope to create hot meal service. And the Salvation Army clients, when they were tracking them in their database, they disappeared. And they had no idea where they went, but they just assumed that they were going over to where they could get access to the hot meals. But they didn't know, and therefore they had no way of really understanding how best to respond, working with their partners in that community. And that was all part of a federal grant that went to a national organization, and then the national organization turned around and through trickle down, that's how the public health unit got the $10,000. And the other one was Food Rescue. Food Rescue is an amazing app, point cloud app. And what they were doing is they were identifying where there was excess food that was going to rot in the farmers' fields. And they put that out and said, here's all this food. For example, French fries. The French fries that are used in restaurants are not ones that you can put in bags that are sold in the supermarkets. So they had to rescue this food that couldn't go to the restaurants because they were closed. And they put that in their app, and you could go in as a community agency and say, I need those potatoes and we will distribute them locally this way. Now that's a great idea at the national level, and this is what this organization does. But the Food Rescue locally wasn't connected in to the supermarket infrastructure. There was one particular supermarket that was active. The others, you had to go through their head offices, and that was a barrier. So we had lots of farmers with tons and tons of tomatoes that were going to rot in the fields if they couldn't redistribute them for addressing food security during the pandemic. We're hoping that we can fix that. And one of the ways that we're hoping to fix that is by leveraging post-secondary programs like the Fleming Postgrad program. Sustainable Coburg has had 3 collaborative research projects with Fleming and with Trent. We've had others as well, looking at things like energy, water quality, and food security. The one I want to talk to you today about is the one that we did called Sustainable Coburg Interactive Web Food Map. And this came out of another mapathon that we did here at Venture 13 in 2019. and it was called Put Fresh Food on the Map. And that was our first experience of trying to leverage youth and their digital skill set to address a local need, in this case, putting fresh food on the map. That was in 2019, and they came up with an app. It was a half-day hackathon, like the one we're going to have April the 23rd. And what they came up with was amazing. The most amazing part of it was the name. They called it North Yumberland. And North Yumberland used census data, and we would demonstrate it today, but you're just going to have to join us down the road as we set this up, and you can see how it's been done in Sustainable Cobra's interactive web food map and the other application, Put Fresh Food on the Map. And Sarah can talk to it as well in terms of the 211 business intelligence dashboard that they're working on. So let me just briefly go through this. This is a story map. Story map is a tool in Esri's ArcGIS Online. This is a free tool for students, and most students would have access to the full suite of ArcGIS programs. I'm agnostic when it comes to the technology. Stats Canada has a whole training session on QGIS that could be easily adapted to the ArcGIS. It's a similar GIS, Geographical Information System program. So let me go through this. What is this interactive web map, food map? Well, what it is an open data interactive food map for Northumberland County. And what the students did is they looked at the problem statement, which I'll just let you read here on the screen if you can see it. Can everybody see my screen? Good go. So this was the problem statement. And I've already mentioned about the 13 food banks. And what we needed was something that was user-friendly, easy to access, and also worked offline, because most of the county people, the most vulnerable people in Northumberland County do have access to mobile phones, smartphones. They may not have a data plan. So that's why it has to work offline once they get the information from a location where they have access. So for example, the Salvation Army would have access, the libraries would have access. During the COVID pandemic, a lot of the big companies like in Toronto were setting up towers and providing access to neighborhoods to set up free internet web access. It was called Toronto Go. And that infrastructure is still there. And the nonprofits were the ones that used it in order to provide this service where the need was in Toronto. And we did the same thing here in Northumberland County. So here was the study area, Northumberland County. And the townships listed. We have 7 townships in Northumberland County. The town of Coburg is the largest. We're a town of 20,000 roughly. The population is expected to expand to 26,000 by 2035, I believe. And the challenge we face here is that a lot of the people are retiring from Toronto and we have an aging population. What we need are more young people like these people to build these kinds of applications. So you can see that what they did is they identified the map, the area, and they set up their objectives. And I might just add one thing that we participated, Sustainable Coburg participated in a hackathon called Together versus the Virus. Together versus the Virus started in Estonia, moved to Germany, Switzerland, and then came over to Canada. In Germany, there were 45,000 participants in that event. And it was more an information event and also a hackathon. So what we did is we proposed it's called the greenhouse, postal greenhouse. And I hooked up with somebody else in the Slack channel who was also participating in this hackathon, and we joined together, just like we're doing today with Northumberland County and Simcoe County and our partners. And then we were able to come up with this idea is, okay, how can we distribute fresh food that would go to waste and end up in landfills for those most vulnerable people while the food was still usable? So that was the objective. And we came up with this project that led to this interactive web map. So you can see that they've created a database, and for community partners like Courtney's group, It's simply a spreadsheet. It could be a Google Sheet, or it could be a Google Airtable, which is a little bit more interactive. And once you have the information in there, it can be word of mouth, but then you have people who are like navigators. And what I like about Sarah's team is they have their ears and on the ground listening to the word of mouth channels. And then they're able to connect that up with the standardized data sets offered through 211 and its taxonomy. And what we were looking to do is to automate this workflow using a program called FME. FME software. One of the mentors for this project was Dean Hertz, and he is an open data champion with Safe Software. Safe Software is a Canadian success story out of Vancouver. They do work all over the world. In fact, they were involved in the Blue Dot AI machine learning application a doctor put together after SARS that was the first to discover the spread of the COVID virus from China. And they use data from open data of the airline traffic from China to the rest of the world. And we're able to identify the pattern in which that virus would spread. So visualization is a key thing here, maps. And the other thing that you have to be aware of is it needs to be accessible for those that have that are blind, deaf, or have a cognitive dissonance challenges. So that's a challenge if you're using maps, but I don't want to go into the details. I want to just get into this. So here's the timelines. They did this over the course of, well, the program was 10 months, and they did this over the course of 4 months of that program. So it's really a hands-on learning experience. And what they used was this survey 2123 form. And in the form, you can enter, you create the form, just like a Google form, and you enter that information. And then what they did is they mapped it out to make it say, if you were going to do a pop-up site, place it here where it would be walkable, 15 minutes for those most vulnerable who didn't have transportation and couldn't drive to the one food bank that was operated by the county. So this is just an example of how they would do that. You can see the green dots, and the shaded area around it would be the walkable area. And now the solution after 7 weeks of dedicated work, and I have to say they've created this dashboard, and I'm going to give Sarah a heads up. I'm going to turn it over to you in a minute to talk about the 211 dashboard that you're working on, because I think it's very similar. And we did use the data that David Montaigne, the Find Help data manager, provided for this project. And you can see that they are able to then say, here are the food markets in your area. Of course, most of them were closed. And so a lot of them were just pop-up sites in a parking lot somewhere. And then they were able to use local food markets and bring those people into the mix. So if they were driving to say, they don't want to necessarily have people showing up at their gate, their farm gate, they want to take it somewhere, or have people pick it up, volunteers, and drive it to where it would be accessible. That's what this dashboard was doing. And you can see that here are some examples. You can market locations, and these would be pop-up sites, not just your traditional locations during a pandemic. And then you can do the survey link. I won't show that. And then there's the demo. You'll have access to these slides, and the demo is a 14-minute demo of this project, which is very useful. It gets more technical. And then here are our clients. And you can visit the clients here. And that's a database that Courtney, people like yourself, would set up and you would use with the public health unit. And they did that they did the census data for your dissemination areas, which is the smallest area. And then you can begin to create what are called heat maps to say, here's where the need is based on what we know and what we've been able to map and visualize through this GIS system. And here were the three amazing people. And I just looked up at their LinkedIn. So Christopher Webb, he got a job after this program working for a private firm. Jim got a job with Esri in the United States, and he actually has created some interactive workshops. So he's giving back to the community, which is great. And Kazia, she got a job with Safe Software. using this FME connection. So there's the link for their information, and LinkedIn is a great tool to access training from Go Open Data to 211 and to what these folks are doing. So I'm just going to go on to Jim's article here that he just published, and you can see how these young people are able to give back. And I bet you if I contacted these 3 people and asked them to be mentors in a hackathon, that I would hopefully get their support, depending on the company, right? But this is an example of using ArcGIS Story Maps, which is the one that you just saw, which is very easy for students to use. It's like PowerPoint on steroids, if you use it right. So he's done this stargazing example, and what I would do is I would have him do an earth gazing example based on the interactive web map that they built for us. So I'll put that challenge out to Jim, and now that's the background on that. Sarah, do you want to say a few words about your BI dashboard and how you see it maybe utilizing some of the point cloud stuff that I just talked about?
Yeah, so our BI dashboard is available to the public as sort of a snapshot of our most important metrics on 211ontario.ca. And that data is really about our interactions with people. So when we're talking to people about their needs, we record all that in our call management system, and that data is available to share. Like I said, there is a dashboard. We use Power BI, a Microsoft product, and we are willing to share that data with community partners if they have a need that would benefit the community. Yeah, and it's all about the needs that are presented by people. If we encounter a barrier to a need, that's collected too. So we call that our unmet needs data, and it's very detailed. So it'll go down to, emergency food is an unmet need due to transportation, and then we'll have that linked to the postal code. So that's the good community data that we feel could be leveraged when layered with other data points, like some of the StatsCan data.
Yeah, so could you elaborate? That's a great example of the fact that most of the vulnerable population in our rural communities, well, not just in our any community for that matter. When I worked for government, we talked about clients that had complex needs. I hate that term, but that's the term we used. Complex needs simply pointed out the fact that they needed transportation, they needed mental health, they needed food, they needed shelter, and they just needed care, basic care. And they weren't getting it because a lot of the services are fragmented that come into our community, and it's an onerous task for people like Courtney and Sarah to keep abreast of all of the reporting that has to be made to the funders at the provincial and federal level. But that's another story. The main story I'm hearing here as success is where Sarah and Courtney and the Simcoe County can use the information to address those complex needs. So Sarah, can you come up with an example of a client that was helped who needed both transportation and emergency food access? I'm putting you on the spot, but both of you can address that question, I'm sure, from your extensive experience working with the clients that are the most vulnerable.
Sure. I mean, I don't have a specific example, but I will say that the majority of the people that we deal with are not presenting with a single need. It's always a complex need. If one need presents itself, there's probably going to be a number more. In fact, it just makes me think we're actually working with the University of Toronto right now, their School of Public Health, to do a study, a follow-up study with all of our callers to 211 in the Ontario system. And they're running them through another survey to understand if there were unexpressed needs that they didn't even bother to bring up to our navigators during their first call. We've only been running it we're in our third week right now, and we are finding that it's like 90% of the calls have more than one unexpressed need, and they're all getting filtered back into the 211 system to try to deal with them. So these issues are often hand in hand. If you're vulnerable, you might lack access to transportation, you might be food insecure, have trouble paying your bills. Maybe the root cause is untreated mental health issue. Maybe you're a caregiver who's overburdened and needs more support and balls are falling in other areas. And so that's part of the work that we do to try to walk people through the needs assessment and deal with each of those issues. And again, record them in our systems so that ultimately we can leverage all the data that we're collecting from people to help better support their communities. I don't know if that helps, Jonathan. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. And Courtney, maybe you could speak to you based on your experience in Simcoe County working with partners, your experience of where the complex needs come up and how a dashboard might help you to better serve those clients.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just really highlighting that oftentimes the root cause is poverty in many of these situations. So, recognizing the impact of household food insecurity, not having enough money for food, how that does impact mental health status. There's some really interesting research around increase of emergency visits and high pain or need for like pain management. So there's lots of impacts of living in poverty that we need to recognize. So that's why part of our work is advocacy, getting to that root cause. And then at a community level, also recognizing that only 1 out of 4 people who need emergency food or food bank support actually go to a food bank. So also thinking that food banks won't always be that key resource, although you're usually seeing people in what we would say a state of material deprivation. They've done everything they can to preserve their dignity before going to a food bank. So they're in crisis mode oftentimes. And so what we talk about with all of our food banks, we meet once a month, is how do you support the food banks being connected with 2-in-1. So we had Sarah come to our meeting and also how to provide that other wraparound service for people that are coming in crisis. The other thing is when we recognize that only 1 in 4 people who need food are actually going to a food bank, it's thinking about where else are they, excuse me, in the community that they're going to be needing to access food. So how do you create community spaces? So things that we're looking at is libraries right now, and those community hubs, and how do we connect food there, community gardens, different things like that. So where are these spaces that people are looking for connection? There's oftentimes a lot of isolation living in poverty. So where there's places where there's connection and community, how can we also make sure that those organizations have access to this data? So then you can kind of say, hey, there's a food resource here. So just thinking a little outside the box, that it's not always those emergency services we're thinking of. So how do we create those unique organizations, or how do we get those other organizations to be connected to this data is something that we're always thinking about.
So that's a great segue into the whole concept of resiliency. And in our next workshop, Jason Robinson is going to be talking about the principles of ecological economics applied to managing natural assets. But there was a report in the Globe and Mail and the Star yesterday from Intact Climate Lab out of Waterloo University. It was called, well, I've forgotten the title already, but it has to do with the fact that we're going to see more and more days over 30 degrees Celsius. And the impact that's going to have on the most vulnerable population, especially the elders, that we're going to see more need for natural assets to help build this resiliency. For example, planting trees where shade would be available to those in the most vulnerable neighborhoods where there aren't trees or sufficient shade. Simple things like that, where you can work with nature, not against nature, in order to build a more resilient community that can deal or mitigate the effects of climate change.
Name is Mike. I'm with a company called Scribble Maps, and we're based out of my hometown of Windsor, Ontario. I know for some people, Canada cuts off at London, but Windsor, Ontario does exist, and that's where Scribble Maps is based out of. And I'm located in Toronto, Ontario, where I've been. Sorry, I talk to a lot of Americans, obviously, so I gotta go to Toronto, Ontario. So I've been here for over 12 years. And you mentioned ArcGIS and Esri earlier. So Scribble Maps is like that, but not as complicated. And I'm hopefully going to show you how we can turn some spreadsheets and some raw data into some fun maps that we can filter through. My background, I used to do walking tours in downtown Toronto for over 10 years. And because of the pandemic, I had to kind of make a pivot until things kind of got back to normal. So I started working with Scribble Maps, doing everything and anything with them. Some of the other stuff I do as well is I also volunteer. I volunteer with an organization here in Toronto called Club Sandwich, and another organization called Food for the Record, where they take used vinyl records, which is one of my passions, and they turn that into sandwiches for the food insecure. So some of the things that Courtney and Sarah's talking about are things that are close to my heart as well. And I'm excited to be part of this initiative and helping out.
That's great. And you're just a walking model of walkable communities.
Right. If you want to say that. Yeah, I wouldn't put myself too high up on the billboard, but yeah.
No, but I think that's great because it's an example of how you can combine the on the ground. We call it in the GIS world, they call it ground truthing. So the workshop after ours is going to be focusing on cloud point technology and using machine learning and AI to do some amazing things. And that's great. But even there, you need to ground truth it in here and now with real objects and real people. So yeah, so let's roll up our sleeves, and Mike's going to walk us through some examples with Scribble Maps. And Scribble Maps, we've set up accounts, or will set up accounts for the hackers that want to participate for prizes this Saturday. So let's start with the first example. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so can everyone see my screen okay?
I see it, yeah. And I'm going to move over to the chat room, my other computer, so take it over.
So actually, as Courtney was speaking there, I remembered a map I made last summer, or actually, Jonathan, as you were talking about with the heat. So I made this for a local constituency that I volunteer for, but this is a map of all the cooling locations in downtown Toronto. So you can see that I have, beaches, pools, wading pools, air-conditioned areas when that consists of shelters, there's libraries, and then I also have the ward sectioned off for that constituency as well. So this might look like a complex map that has a whole bunch of different information in there, but I was able to make this in a matter of seconds by just going to the City of Toronto's open data catalog and then searching cooling locations, downloading the file formats. There's many different file formats, but it was a GeoJSON file, then importing it into our software. It's really that easy. This is kind of what a spreadsheet might look like, or a CSV at its raw form right here. So a couple of different files that I have. I have all the school information and student demographics for Ontario right here. And I have it in different categories: at board name, board type, school name, school type, the school level, school language. And we can even go through that further. We have the percentage of language that's English and French. So we can turn that into a map, and I'll show you how we can do that in a second. We also have another spreadsheet that was given to us, which has all the Simcoe and Northumberland food resources. So we can use our software to plot that out. And then what's great about plotting these out onto maps right here, and you can turn them into heat maps, as you mentioned earlier, is we can try and find holes in the system or areas where there might not be being serviced. We can also try to find patterns as well. So sometimes when you're looking at spreadsheets, it's just, again, a lot of text and words, and it's really hard to make sense of the story. It's like the script, if you will. And the map, that's the production, that's the movie, that's the bigger picture. And that's what our software helps you do. And then another one I have right here, because we have that election coming up in the summer, provincially, I have an Ontario riding map. So this is kind of what it looks like on a spreadsheet right here. And this is what the finished project would be right here. So each polygon I have has all that information on that spreadsheet. It has the MPP, the party, the parliamentary role, address of the constituency office, the population, and the name. And then we can apply filters to all these as well. So I can go, okay, show me where all the NDP is in Ontario, where the leader is female, and the population is over 100,000 right there. And again, this is just a matter of importing a GeoJSON file, making some customizations, and then adding these filters. So it doesn't take a long time to create this information that you see right here. So with that, Jonathan, would you like me to maybe import one of these spreadsheets here?
Sure, but before you do that, let's just ask Sarah and Courtney to comment on how we might use this for the Hackathon Challenge this Saturday. So Courtney, maybe you could put Mike on the spot by asking him, can you do this and this with what you've just seen Mike showing on the screen? You'll have to unmute.
Sorry, yeah. Trying to get my mouse to work there. Yeah, so many questions, right? Thinking about, my initial thought is like, yeah, can we have like temporary food relief organizations, so like food banks, Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul, and like the opportunity to like overlay it with schools. Like would be something I'm thinking about, even just like to better understand like the opportunity for different like programs and partnerships. Like that's something that comes to mind right away. Another thing that is indirectly related is we've been working on volunteer income tax clinics and seeing where they're located within the county, and then where that's how they are, where they're located in relation to a lot of food programs. So that's like something else I was thinking of.
Yep.
Okay, just before you do that, think about how, because I'm going to make it a little easier for Mike. He showed us the ridings, and one of the most powerful things you can do as an advocate is write a letter to the constituency office asking for something very specific. Because when you do that, when I worked in government, that would come to the minister that the Ontario government felt was responsible for answering it. And then it would come down to a policymaker like I was, an education officer. And then I would have to, or we would have to write a response to that particular request. And it all gets tagged. So when those requests go in through the constituency offices, that gets tagged by the federal and provincial government, and it's searchable. Even that information would be available through an FOI, and we'd be very interested to see exactly how the constituency office was able to support advocacy at the local level. So you mentioned some great examples overlaying the different layers of information. So Mike, I'm going to give you liberty to sort of focus that challenge that Sarah, Courtney has provided.
Sure. Let's take, and thanks, Courtney, for that. Let's take this spreadsheet right here. And this was one that I believe we pulled off from the Ontario website, but this has different categories, as you can see. And we have ones that do say food bank and different types of therapy right there. So I'm going to import this, and then I'm going to use our filtering system just to show all the food bank ones. So going to just quickly copy this right here. And let's go to a blank map that I have here. I'm going to go to import spreadsheet. I'm going to paste the information. And it's just going to take a second because there is a bit of data there.
And Mike?
Yep.
Just want to say that is 211 community resource database information that I sent along. And
Right.
we do actually have the volunteer income tax clinics there as well.
Excellent. Perfect. So we'll be able to try to filter hopefully both there. So I am going to map them out, and I'm going to put for the different categories, I'm going to put them in their own folder as well. So see where it says CWD Simcoe category heading group. I'm going to make that into its own folder. We're going to map that. Again, it's just going to take a second. And there you can see that they've all been mapped around. When we click on that, it has all that information that we have in that spreadsheet that I showed you earlier. Then I can go and go add filters, and I can go attribute equals. So we go show me, and then we'll go to this category right here, and we'll go contains, and we'll go maybe food bank. These are the different types of food banks, as plural as well. There we go. So that's showing food banks in that category. And as you can see, we also had many different subsections of food banks as well. Or another set that you want to see, Courtney, I think you were saying maybe if we imported the schools on top of that as well.
Yeah, a few things. So schools, I'm thinking community kitchens, or inspected kitchens, community gardens. I think any of those are great.
So I'll have this first one as the food list, right? That is our first spreadsheet that we put in, and then we have the food banks. And let's import another spreadsheet here where will be our schools that we have. And this is going to be a massive, massive file because this is all the schools in Ontario. But this is also to demonstrate the power that Scribble Maps has in terms of importing spreadsheets and the data that we can deal with. And you'll see that there's not going to be as much lag as well. So here we go, I'm mapping it out. And again, it's just taking a second. My Mac is, there we go, okay, perfect. So for the school board, I'm going to wait. This will take just 1 second just because we do have a lot of data here. And we'll map out the school board, and then we can show where the school board is relative to the food bank.
Yeah, we're doing well. Just a time check. We've got roughly 20 minutes, so it's good.
Great.
And even when this is waiting, I'm happy to even share like another insight from some of the work that we're doing and why this is helpful. So we have started working with both the Catholic School Board and the Public School Board in Simcoe County. And we're looking at experiential learning and garden-based learning. So getting, when COVID and everything allows, like restrictions allow that kids can be outside again and having guests come in. And so rather than schools having to build new infrastructure or different things like that, that's not always, there's not always that capacity. We're looking at how to partner with municipal infrastructure and community garden spaces and to be able to bring the kids there. And so this is also really helpful, as we move along to say like, hey, these are the resources that we have. This looks like a partnership that we could facilitate. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, along those lines, Sustainable Coburg was going to take over a community garden that the township set up on town property. And some seniors were sort of beyond, they needed to hand it over, which is fair enough. They put a lot of effort into it. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to take that over and then do exactly what you're doing. So hopefully we'll be able to collaborate after this, Courtney, and use the 211 unmet service needs and the curricula in terms of pathways to green jobs, which isn't just about computer science and GIS data analysis, but it's also getting outdoors. And that's a key thing with mental health for students that have been cooped up in online courses. So great example of how to use the technology for place-based growth.
And while I'm doing that, it seems that all the schools, it is just throttling it right now. That's okay. So I'm just starting it again on this new map here, and then we'll just quickly do that again, and then maybe we'll just focus on doing the food banks and then the community gardens as well.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things that we're doing a hands-on now, and it's always risky doing a hands-on live, but Mike, you're doing a great job, and Courtney and Sarah in terms of providing the context. So one of the things we want to do moving forward is to use the desktop applications to do the data analysis. So somebody like Jason Robinson, who's a data analyst with Rural Ontario Institute, we'll be talking to them after this conference and ways in which we might be able to have them do some analysis with their GIS online license, which would be desktop based. And then what they can do is they can upload that analysis as an interactive web that would leverage the open data in the cloud. So in order to make it more accessible to people like myself and Sarah and Courtney, who are trying to address complex needs in our rural neighborhoods and with our neighbors.
Let's go back to taxonomy is food banks. And then we will do another filter we'll apply on top of that is where we wanted community gardens. Now, Sarah, was that the category for that? Is community gardens?
It is, yes.
Okay. Yes, there we go. So we have both filters, right? And then we can customize the icons based on that as well. So I'll put all these ones into their own folder. So I'm going to go to copy. And then we will have another one, which is right here. So this one we can make as our community gardens. I can go, because I have it in its own folder, I can go operations here, and I can do a bulk marker style change in group. So let's see what we have for garden. Okay, and I can colorize these icons into whatever I'd like here. Let's put that, and we will put that into that garden marker right here. And then I can change that name as well. I'll call this gardens. And I'll turn this other folder into, I'll call this food banks here. And I'll change the icons in that as well. So I'll go, okay, new style, and we'll just put food here. This comes up. And we'll go food banks, change the marker style in food banks. And when we have the filters on, it should show that. There we go. So you have your community gardens now, you have your food banks as well. So I'll try importing the schools again one more time. Maybe. Let's see if this will take it this time. And this time I'm just going to save our map as well. And let's go and now import the spreadsheet again. Very important too when we're importing the spreadsheets that it does have these columns on top of it. Let's try it one more time. And does anybody, while I'm waiting to do this, does anybody have any questions so far?
We have no questions from the chat, but Sarah, I'm sure, and Courtney will have some questions. I'll let them go first, and then I'll add one or two.
So now I put the schools in here as well. You can see all this data right here. And I'm just going to quickly turn these schools into smaller markers as well. So I'm just going to call this circle here. And I'm going to make it a little small dot. And there's the schools, and I'm going to even shrink them a little bit smaller, and then we can filter through them. So that cleans it up a little bit more for us right here. And because I imported the schools in different folders, I can filter them through there. But we can now take a quick glance with that data that we have. And if I actually lock the school boards here as well, and then apply these filters, we can see how close our different resources are to different schools as well. I can use a radius tool as well. So if I want to go for, say, this food bank, so the Thornton Community Food Bank, and if I want to put a radius around that as well, I could go to operations here, add to main menu, and I can go travel time. So select that marker, food bank. I think that was all 64 was the name of it right there. Let's just go back and double check. Yes, all 64, okay. And then Sarah or Courtney, if you want to give me a travel time from that, whether walking or driving.
In Thornton, I would say driving most likely would be my, so like, let's say within 15 minutes.
With a 15-minute drive.
Mm-hmm.
So 15-minute drive. And this shows us all the different places that it will go to within a 15-minute drive. And then if I lock that and then again apply our filters, we can see that it is going to these different locations right here. And because I have this locked, second. You can see, okay, we have the library that it's going close to as well. We have the elementary school. I could also now take all this information that's in this polygon and I can put it into another folder as well. So if I want to take the 15-minute drive, I can go operations here and I can go add to group the markers in polygon. So I will select that polygon, that 15-minute drive, put that into that new group. And then we can see the 75 locations that are within that right there. So this is all the different school boards, as you can see right here, that are within a 15-minute drive to that food bank as well. So you can see in real time as well that I just imported 2 spreadsheets here, quickly did some advanced features within our platform. And we have not only this insight, but we have a map as well in a matter of seconds. And again, don't have to, study long and hard to be able to acquire these skills in order to make these maps as well. It's very, very easy. A walking tour guide from Toronto can do it. So
Amazing.
So cool.
Any comments, Courtney, Sarah? Tips for
Uh,
our hackers?
Yeah, I just think this is, I was sharing with Mike when we were like meeting initially, like this is incredible because this is something that constantly comes up because we have the 211 data, but like how do we then use it in like map form and seeing the bigger picture and planning and different things like that. So another thing I think about, or I guess I have a question, is on the side you have this list that's captured, let's say within that radius. Does that also become like printable in some way, or like is that list like easy to export if people were like, I just want to see what's in this little catchment area?
excellent question, and absolutely, yeah. So
Cool.
I'm just gonna save it here first. So first we can share a link of this live map with your colleagues or people you're presenting in front of. But for your initial question is if we want to save this as a CSV. So we right click on the folder, we go export CSV. And let's just make this a food banks, we'll call it. And then when I open that up, let me just find it on my desktop here. This is what it will look like right here. So that is just that folder that I have with all that information. And then of course we can delete the unnecessary information in the spreadsheet if needed.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, just like that, another function of many, I'm sure, but that's
Yep.
good to know. And like even we were talking before about like giving examples of like how this would be helpful, taking the 211 data as well as other information. So at one of our local food banks in Southern Simcoe, they have had a lot of new Canadians coming, or newcomers coming to their area and needing the food bank. And so they had they said almost 30 and only spoke Spanish. So they were just saying in the call, like, are there any supports? Because they're using like their phones and things like that. And what came out of it was like, oh, connect with the schools. And then there may be services there. And from there, they've got tutors, they have a translator. So it was just like, how do we know what resources are out there, and like quickly pulling this up for service providers. So it was a really cool step-by-step of connecting all these organizations together, and just like seeing this is like, oh my gosh, it would be so cool to have that visual representation of it as well.
Yep. And then further, we can also create heat maps as well to kind of get a better visual for that as well. And to your point, if any column that we have in a spreadsheet or CSV that can show up as an attribute here on the map, and then we can use our filtering to filter through that as well to better tell that story. So for the hackers who may be watching, if there is something that you want to add that might be missing on these CSVs or spreadsheets, that you can add them either before. You can see that our spreadsheets are down here as well in this panel called Data View. And we can also add attributes as well. So let's say this food bank right here, I'm going to click on that. I'll right click on that, and I'm going to go to Edit Attributes. And you see it has all these different attributes. Those are columns in the spreadsheet. I can also add one as well. We can put one, say, for language. And then we can go Spanish, as you were saying, save. And then when we click on it, it will have that right there.
So this is great, Mike. I think that you've given the hackers lots to chew on, and we hope that we'll get at least 3 teams competing for the prize in this category, unmet service needs. And we're looking forward to partnering with Scribble, Simcoe County, and our neighbors in Northumberland County to bring this forward and connect up our partners and our different sectors that are providing public services like the schools, the municipality, the county, public health units. So great examples, and you've done a great job here at doing that. And I have put the 2 links to the story map, which is one of the challenges with the provincial election coming up on June the 2nd and the municipal election coming up in October. And what we want to try and do is build the capacity using these tools for students to advocate, to do deputations to the council, and to write to their constituency offices to get answers to questions that they find are critical to build resiliency in our rural communities and with our neighbors across the world. So I'm just going to give each one of you a last closing remark, and then we'll sign off. I'll start with Courtney, Sarah, and then Mike.
Yeah, well, so first of all, just thank you for having me here today. It's been a learning experience for sure. I said initially, I was like, I'm not a data person. I don't know too much, but really recognizing the power that it has, especially when we're looking at whether it's unmet needs or any accessing food in whatever capacity that may be for people. So whether it's temporary or emergency food relief or connecting with like local producers, I just think there is so much capacity. And yeah, so something that I'm taking away and that we can think about for Saturday is understanding that, the root cause is often when people need temporary food relief is poverty. And so there's lots of different layers of or barriers to access. So thinking of the transportation, the food, the social isolation, we are talking about the income tax clinics. So I'm thinking about like, how can we use this technology and this data to connect people to more services, like using 211's data that more service providers can also use in tangible ways. So that's something that I'm thinking about. And yeah, I've learned a lot today. So thank you.
Thanks. Sarah.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. One of the things that I was thinking while I was watching Mike work with the maps is, it's one thing to have a technology, but it needs to tell a story, right? So I think it would be really interesting to maybe look at whatever service it is, if we use food as our example today, have that on the map, and then maybe layer on the unmet needs data that we're also collecting from people in these actual communities to understand why they might not be able to utilize their local food bank. And sort of that type of thinking can be expanded to any type of community resource that people who are living in poverty would need to access. I think mental health is a big one. I'm glad Courtney mentioned transportation, because that does always come up as a significant barrier when we're trying to support people in rural communities. And I think it's something that's not always taken into consideration when program building. So I think there's just a lot of opportunities to really think about analyzing problems faced by our most vulnerable individuals in our communities and how we can present a data case to try to make change in our communities to help the people that need it the most. And I appreciate the opportunity to share with everyone today and maybe see some unique solutions.
Well, one unique solution would be the EV drivers, the ones that have EV cars, helping with the transportation. So it would be a decarbonized volunteer footprint. Mike, and then we'll say goodbye to our participants, and we look forward to them participating in the hackathon on Saturday. Mike, last word.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And thank you everyone again for having me here. And by the way, I'll be there on Saturday if anyone needs help for tutorials and if you have any questions while using our software. And I think just to bounce back on what Sarah and Courtney was saying, especially what Sarah was saying about we need unique solutions. And, housing, food insecurity, these are problems that exist in our country that shouldn't exist. We're a rich, wealthy country where I think it's inexcusable that we have the level of poverty and food insecurity. And, Jonathan was saying earlier that you can write to your local MP or MPP or city councilor. As someone who's volunteered with these organizations, these different political parties before, they're all just people, just like you and I, at the end of the day, with only so much time and resources. So what's really important is that we all kind of do our part to troubleshoot this issue, and it can be done. It can be solved. We just need to find different alternatives and unique solutions in order to do that. So that's where you come into play, the students, and especially with the hackathon, is using these tools, but also using the knowledge that you have that we older people might not have. And there can be solutions to these issues. There should be solutions to these issues. And if we all do our part, if we all work together, we can achieve these solutions, or that's what I like to believe anyways. So I'm hoping that this will inspire someone, and using these tools and using this technology will come up to modern solutions to these problems that we have. And I look forward to seeing everyone on Saturday. And thanks again for having me.